Hello and welcome to the Rugby Chat. Tonight we will be talking about the international coaches. We'll have a look forward to Super Rugby, have a talk about the MOR, and also look at maybe having a handicap competition. Look how fun it is watching Saracens chase everybody else. And then finally, obviously we have to talk about the hot topic recently, which is Rob Howley and his ban from rugby for gambling. So that's how it's going to be. Hi, I'm Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul, best place rugby predictions and opinion, and this is Rugby Chat, coming to you at 8 p.m. every Tuesday. Now, normally the show is live, but unfortunately due to technical issues, I'm having to pre-record this one. And it's going to be a bit different because what I've done is I've got some friends to a couple of videos giving you their answers to the questions that I'm going to pose this evening. You can also see these questions out on Twitter, so if you fancy joining in the conversation you can do, as well as the live chat here and the comments down below. So who's joining me this evening? Well, I've got Hugh and Herman have sent me in videos, so thank you guys for that. And let's kick off with question number one then. With only the Springboks to announce their new head coach, who has the best coaching setup heading into the next Rugby World Cup cycle? Obviously, you've got teams like Scotland, who is sticking with Gregor Townsend, England sticking with Eddie Jones, Argentina staying with Mario Ledesma. But you've also got Ireland with Andy Farrell. Italy have gone blank as the guy who used to coach the Cheetahs. France have a new head coach. Wales obviously have Wayne Pivac coming in. Australia with Dave Rennie, and New Zealand with Ian Foster as well. So who's got the best setup? Let's hand it over to Hugh, who's going to tell us that. But he's also going to give us a rundown as to the Pacific Island coaching setups and a good reminder as to what's going on there.
As an Australian, I'm obviously looking forward to seeing how Dave Rennie goes at the Wallabies. He comes to the job with an excellent record at provincial and club level. And what a lot of people in the Australian rugby public are hoping he brings to the job is some consistency when it comes to match day selections, as well as a bit more positivity when it comes to things like comments regarding match officials and interactions with the media. He's managed to bring back Scott Wisemantle, who's been working with the England squad. He's previously spent some time with the Waratahs coaching their backs and as a skills coach, and there's a lot of good reports about him and the work that he's done in the past. I'm also looking forward to seeing what happens with the three Pacific nations. I don't think any of them have announced who their coaches will be going forward. With regards to Fiji, John McKee's been there for quite some time now. He's taken them to the last two Rugby World Cups. And although their 2019 campaign will be memorable probably more for anything than their loss to Uruguay, which admittedly came off a very quick turnaround for Fiji after their opener against the Wallabies. But he does have a good record with Fiji. In the time that he's been in charge, they've certainly beaten Italy twice as well as Scotland. And they've won the Pacific Nations Cup, I think, 4 consecutive times now. So even though during the World Cup the Fiji media and the rugby public were quite critical of him, it's clear that he's done some very good work with Fiji. So it'll be interesting to see if he does continue. He did apply for the Waratahs job, but apparently wasn't even granted an interview. So whether or not he has the desire to continue on for another 4 years or not, I'm not sure. In Tonga, their current coach is Todai Kefu, and he's been there for a few years. He's a former Wallaby, obviously. They didn't have a great 2019, but they did show a lot of improvement in the previous 2 years, which also coincided with them finally getting to host a test match back in Nuku'alofa after many years of only playing away. He has said that he's going to take some time out post-Rugby World Cup to consider his future. I know that there are also reports that Dave Rennie is trying to convince him to come back to Australia and work with the Wallabies, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. In Samoa, their coach is currently Steve Jackson, and he's only been there for a year or two, and although I believe he hasn't signed anything going forward. The reports are that he is hopeful that he will continue on for another 4 years.
So yes, Hugh is looking forward to Dave Rennie, unsurprisingly, at the the Wallabies, and so he gave us a quick rundown of all the Pacific Island coaching setups, which is good. So he's looking forward to him. Who's Herman got lined up as being the best, or in fact, he's going to tell us who he thinks is the worst coaching setup heading into next Rugby World Cup.
I'm not sure who's got the best setup at the moment. I guess it's probably England who has the best setup of the coaches. But I do know that New Zealand have a worst coaching setup for a long, long time. Just think, would any other European club or test nation appoint Ian Foster as manager? No.
So Herman's not sure about who's best. He went for England. I'm not so sure about that. Obviously got Eddie Jones, who's been in there for 4 years, has got a good record, but he's losing all his assistants, which is a bit of a mess, really. And there are definitely some people asking about his management setup there. So yes, some definite question marks there around assistants. And you could say the same is happening with Ian Foster, as let's be honest, he has just, well, Scarlett's just come out and announced that their head coach is thinking about whether he wants to join or not. Has he got everything lined up? Well, I'll go into that in more detail tomorrow night with the All Blacks edition. Obviously, Herman thinks Ian Foster wouldn't be taken on by anybody else. That's perhaps a little bit harsh, but I can see where he's coming from. Ian Foster doesn't have the head coaching pedigree, does he? He's got it at the assistant level. He's won a Rugby World Cup at assistant level, but not at the top level. So I can understand where he's coming from with that one. I think Gregor Townsend, looking at some others who's sticking around, really has more growing into that role to go. He has Scotland disappointed at the Rugby World Cup, didn't they? Let's be honest. It's going to be interesting to see Andy Farrell as the head coach. Obviously, did very well as assistant under Schmidt, but was actually one of the people who was blamed, I think, really for the Lancaster era coming to an end. So it's going to be interesting to see how he goes there. Dave Rennie, I've not been a great fan of him cultural-wise, but he is putting together a good setup around him. So I can see definitely an argument for Dave Rennie having one of the better coaching setups in World Rugby at the moment. There's so many new guys at the top with little international experience. It really is going to be interesting to see how it all pans out over the next few years. But yeah, you've got to say Dave Rennie, the group he's setting up there, also with Scott Johnson above him, that all seems to be fitting into place quite nicely for the Wallabies. The question is that enough to overcome some of the structural issues that they've got in Australia, and the fact they're running out of cash as well? Let's hope all the infighting can come to an end. It's really going to be interesting to see what Rassie sets up underneath him and how hands-on or how hands-off he is in that setup. So yeah, South Africa is the wild card at the moment, with a lot of inexperienced ones and then a lot of change really in England. So really interesting time the next couple of years in international rugby. Let's have a look at question number 2. It's 45 days to Super Rugby. What player, team or story are you most looking forward to? Well, Hugh has a couple of things in here to talk about, so let's hand over and see what he's looking forward to next year.
Heading into the 2020 Super Rugby season, I think it's going to be really fascinating to see how the Jaguares go and whether or not they can repeat their heroics from the 2019 season. I'm also looking forward to seeing how the Australian teams go, and in particular whether or not they can be a bit more competitive across the board, and in particular competitive against the New Zealand teams in New Zealand. I also think it's going to be interesting to see how the Sunwolves go in their final Super Rugby season, and whether or not they can prove to be competitive rather than just easy beats.
Yes, can the Jags go back-to-back and back up what was a really successful year? The Australian teams, I'll be honest, not got a lot of faith in them. I think there's a lot of lack of quality there, and a really big rebuilding process needed for them. The Sunwolves, well, it's a different team, isn't it? It's hardly the same guys. So, yeah, it's going to be a struggle for those guys, to be honest. But some definite interesting storylines going on there. Now, I'm not quite sure what Herman has been drinking, But just listen to what his suggestion is for Super Rugby next year.
I have a really weird gut feeling about Super Rugby this season. I kind of think that actually the Stormers, yes, the effing Stormers are going to be the sensation team of the 2020. And I'm even going to put some money on them for winning it all. Can you believe it? Woo.
Yeah, I don't have much faith in the Stormers. It's going to be interesting. I mean, one of the storylines that is going to be interesting is what happens with the South African franchises with their new salary cap. How does that impact them? Does that even the playing field amongst them? Who has spent their money the most wisest out of those groups? And with the coaches not being part of the salary cap, that might be the big difference between those. So it's going to be interesting who's got the best coaching setup in South Africa. Obviously, brand new coaches across the board, or very new coaches across the board for the South African Super Rugby franchises. So, really going to be interesting to see what happens in South Africa and how that all balances out. We're building projects down in Otago for the Highlanders. We always seem to write them off as not having the names, and we're going to be doing that again. You're going to hear a lot of pundits do that again this year. Can they continue to defy the paper? It's going to be interesting, or the team on paper. It's going to be interesting to see if they can be more than some of their parts yet again, and actually the next really big story in New Zealand is going to be Warren Gatland running the Chiefs. Obviously, being successful, spent a lot of time with Wales, like 12 years now, wasn't it? I think with Wales. So going from an international role to a day-to-day role with Super Rugby, it's going to be interesting to see how he does there and whether he can pull that off. A lot of people very excited for the Chiefs, but definitely be following that one very closely. Now, one of the things that's been really interesting has been the Premiership this season. It has been all over the shop, really competitive, and part of that is down to, and really good storylines, and part of that is down to Saracens getting docked all of those points and suddenly being off the bottom of the table and basically having to catch up on the bottom sides. That's led to, I say, quite an interesting storyline for the Premiership, and that had me thinking, should there be a handicap tournament? A tournament where different teams, depending on maybe how they did last year or their salary cap or something like that, how much you spend, get minus X number of points and have a handicap race to the end of the season. I know it's crazy and probably could never happen, but let's see how Herman thought about this question that I put him.
Vancouver certainly stands out for me as a place that would be an ideal site for future expansion for Major League Rugby. Rugby is very well established in British Columbia. It's been played there for well over 100 years, and I believe that there are over 70 clubs in BC, so I think that they could certainly support a franchise, despite Vancouver obviously being quite close to Seattle, where there's already an existing franchise. In terms of markets and sizable markets in the US that don't have a franchise currently in Major League Rugby, Chicago obviously stands out there. For a franchise to be based there, climate would obviously be a major issue, but with somewhere like Toronto already having a team, I think that there would be ways around that.
So Herman's a big no-no. I think it would be quite fun, but I don't know how you would go about structuring it, to be honest. But I really do like the idea of some sort of handicap system. Maybe, yes, you're allowed to spend more money on your team, but for every X thousand you spend, you lose X number of points at the beginning of the season. You have to try and catch up everybody else. I think that would be a fun alternative way to do it. No professional competition in the world, I think, runs this way, so it probably would not. It probably is a non-starter. Let me know your thoughts, because I think the handicap thing could be a lot of fun. While you're at it, don't forget to subscribe down below to the channel, please, and get your bell on so you get notifications every time I put a video live. Also, head over to DrivingMaul.com for all your rugby predictions. I've got predictions up there now for the Pro 14, the Gallagher Premiership, and also the Top 14 coming up this weekend. Right, On to question 4 then. With Dallas and Los Angeles joining Major League Rugby next season, where else would you like to see Major League Rugby expand to? So here, Hugh gives us his thoughts on where he'd like to see Major League Rugby expand to next.
Absolutely not. I don't like handicap systems. I do understand why Saracens got 35 points docked in the Premiership this season, but to kind of try to equal out the tournament by deducting points from the better teams, no.
I have to say, you've got to agree with him that actually a second franchise or a second team in Canada is really needed. You can't run a national setup with just one professional team there, which they've got in Toronto Arrows. And Vancouver does seem to be the logical place for it. Having seen lots of discussions about it, about Vancouver, though, the problem is trying to find a stadium there. And there just isn't the right size stadium anywhere near the city. So it's always going to be a problem trying to set up a team in Vancouver. I'm not sure where else there could be a team in Canada, but they really do need that second team in Canada. Yep, Chicago has got a lot of history in rugby and is also a big market. That's true. It's where the All Blacks played Ireland and lost, as very famously, a few years ago. So look, they do host rugby there. The other places that have been talked about is Miami, where the Toulon CEO Boulanger. Oh, sorry, my pronunciation's just gone out of my head. But he's talking about putting a team potentially in Miami to join Major League Rugby. And now, as he's sold his stake in Toulon, he's probably got the cash to do so. Let's be honest. That would be an interesting place for it. Another one would be Mexico, which is being touted as the venue for the playoff game or the final game between Major League Rugby and the new professional league in South America being hosted in Mexico. So there's been quite a lot of talk of a team in Mexico over the years. Ohio obviously had the Aviators join Pro Rugby, and that's another venue that has been talked about. And Las Vegas is somewhere that they're hosting several games this year as well. So there are plenty of options for places for Major League Rugby to put more teams. The thing is, they want to try and stop at 16 teams just because of the lack of depth or the number of playing depth there is in the States. They don't want to try and go too big too soon. So with Dallas and LA joining, that takes the league up to 14 teams. So there's really room for two more. Now, one in Mexico, one in Canada would be interesting. Say that team in Mexico to help the Mexican national side would be kind of cool. Let's be honest. So there you go. Those are my kind of thoughts. Those where I'd like to see them. Let's say Miami, Chicago, Ohio, amongst other places, are all ones that have been mentioned in the past and no doubt will come up yet again. So final topic of the night, Rob Howley with his gambling and his 18-month ban with 9-month suspension. So what are the facts around this? Well, it looks like he made something like 363, I think it is, bets on rugby that over 1,000 games had bets on them. So obviously he was involved in multis, something that I've not been involved in. Overall, most of those bets were supposed to be like £1 or £2 here, or £1 or £2. We're not talking £1,000 bets. We're not talking big bets in there. So we are talking something that's at the minor end of gambling, and it appears that there was no match fixing involved, which is really, really important. Some of the bets that he did put on, though, highly questionable. Let's be honest. First try scorer for Wales has been mentioned as one of the bets he put down. As the attack coach for Wales, you'd think he'd have some kind of inside knowledge on that and could influence that. But there's been no suggestion that he did actually influence it or do any kind of match fixing in that kind of way, which is very, very good to hear. It looks like he has got a serious addiction problem, and looking at the size of the bets, it's not. He clearly was not doing this to make money or to take advantage of his position in as a rugby coach. Overall, it's been said that he made a £4,000 loss, which over 5 years, let's be honest, isn't too big. It's still a chunk of cash, not the kind of thing you want to burn. But as I say, over 5 years, it shows you that this was low scale betting on the whole. So clearly, it's more of an addiction issue than a corruption issue. Which is we wouldn't want to see a corruption issue. It's really sad for him, obviously, around this addiction issue. His career is now in tatters as well. Let's be honest. He was lined up to be the next Italian head coach, but that obviously went by the wayside with this announcement. A few question marks as to how he did it for 5 years without getting caught. Really, and the fact that he was using his work phone and work laptop makes some people have said, look, it was a bit of a cry for help. And yes, it does look like that. That doesn't mean he shouldn't be punished in the way he has, but what it does mean is that he just shouldn't be, that it shows he needs support, and he shouldn't just be dropped and shunned by the game. The game, I think, Welsh Rugby Union in particular, need to be looking to try and put as much support around him as possible. Now, he says that he is already seeing counselling or some sort of support, and that he hasn't gambled since recently, which is good to hear. When you've got a problem, not doing it is good. And trying to say you have a manageable way of gambling, I don't think that's probably going to be possible for him. But I'm no expert in that area. It's really sad, I say, what's happened, and I think he needs support from the union. But the punishment is correct. The main thing is now not to just drop him away and say goodbye to him. Gambling is one of those addictive things, and we will be putting out a for your ears only video, having a look at gambling and also the sponsorship side of it, of the sport, because let's be honest, sports and gambling are two things that are totally intertwined. It's very difficult to separate them in some sports more than others, to be honest, such as horse racing. But even so, it still is very closely intertwined with just about every sport on the planet. So it's a real shame. I think the right steps look to have been taken, even if they were a bit slow in catching him in the first place. It looks like, as I say, an addiction problem. And they say it was triggered probably by the death of his sister, which is another sad, obviously very sad occurrence. Let's hope he can recover. I can't see him recovering his career in rugby, in all honesty. But as a person and his personal life, let's hope he gets the support he needs to recover from this. So, thank you very much for watching the Rugby Chat. Been a different style this evening. Big thank you to Herman and Hugh for doing those videos and sending them in for me. Hopefully we'll be back on track with a live show next week on Tuesday at 8 p.m. If not, though, we might have to do another show like this. If you enjoyed it, please let me know what your thoughts on this format. And as I say, don't forget that there will be those tweets out there with all these questions on if you want to join in the discussion on there as well, or you can whack your comments down below. Always appreciate hearing your thoughts on the channel. Thank you very much, and good night.